Resume.
What?
Okay, here we go.
Okay.
I see we have some participants joining the call. Thank you so much. Come on in the room, get yourself comfortable, and we'll get started in just a couple minutes. We do have a question up on the screen asking if you or a loved one is a veteran. Please go ahead and give us some feedback on that, just so we can know who our audience is. And we look forward to answering any questions that you might have. Feel free to type them in the chat box. We have Marcia and Tobias from Fraser, Ryan, Goldberg, and Arnold on the line. I apologize. I've said it so many times that now I actually like worried about tripping myself up. So come on in and we'll get started in just a minute.
And so Chelsea, for some reason, I'm having technical difficulties and I cannot type into the chat box. So I'm not going to mess with it. I don't want to distract myself with trying to.
Okay, don't worry about it.
Yeah. Tell them I'm really here.
They can hear you. You're live.
Okay, good.
I do love these presentations, but one thing I miss is actually being able to see the participants, being able to see their faces. I know we have the Veterans Club of Sunland Village, Sunland Springs Village out there. So a big shout out, hello, as well as all the other veterans and those interested in the presentation on public benefits. We're going to cover Medicare, veterans benefits, ALTCS, and how to tap into those. Just another minute or so. Please go ahead and complete the poll that we've got on the screen, and we'll get started in just a minute. If you can see the chat box, please feel free to type your name in so we know who is on the call with us. Love to be able to get a chance to say hello to you, and feel free to type in any questions that you might have.
Stop trying.
All right, we have a number of people that have joined on in our poll. So that's great to see. We have a number of veterans that have joined us, a couple people that are not veterans, but interested in the topic with public benefits in Arizona. Hi, Bob, thanks for joining. All right, without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our presenters. Let me close that. I have the great pleasure of having Marcia Goodman and Tobias Pierce from Fraser, Ryan, Goldberg, and Arnold, a top elder law law firm in Arizona in elder law. And we are so grateful that they are taking some time today to be able to unravel what can be so confusing when you're going into public benefits in Medicare, VA benefits, and ALTCS. Thank you for those of you that are joining in the call. Marcia Goodman is a certified elder law attorney at Fraser, Ryan, Goldberg, and Arnold. As a fellow American College of Trust Estate Counsel and Best Lawyers in America honoree, Marcia Goodman focuses on life care planning to enhance the health and well-being of her elderly and disabled clients. Marcia's elder law practice includes helping seniors and their families plan for eligibility for Medicaid and veterans benefits and applying for those benefits when appropriate, estate planning, estate administration, and advocating for her clients. Marcia is committed to representing our veterans and is accredited through the VA to practice before the United States Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. A native of Washingtonville, New York, Marcia graduated summa cum laude from St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York, and earned her law degree from the Vanderbilt University School of Law. She began her law career in Grand Rapids, Michigan, before relocating to Phoenix. Tobias Pierce is an estate planning and business attorney at Frazier, Ryan, Goldberg, and Arnold. Tobias focuses his practice in the areas of estate and trust planning, elder law, estate and trust administration, business succession planning, business transactions, and corporate law. Never one to shy away from a challenge, Tobias has earned a reputation as a creative problem solver when handling complex cases and issues. Tobias received his law degree from the Western Michigan University Cooley Law School in 2010 and his bachelor's degree in business and communications from Arizona State University in 2006. Tobias was born and raised in Prescott and comes from a long line of Arizona natives dating back to his great-grandfather, who was one of Arizona's first state senators. Without further ado, I'm delighted to have Marcia and Tobias join us, and we will go ahead and start our presentation. It's going to be on Medicare benefits in the beginning, and then we're going to transition to veterans benefits. Please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. Let's make sure that we provide the information that you are looking for. At the end of the presentation, we will have time for some questions, but you can certainly add them in the middle. And then if you're interested in this presentation, I'm happy to email it over to you, and we will have a handout that also will come to you in the mail post presentation. So with that, I will send it on over to Marcia and Tobias. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. We just want to say you've done a fantastic job in getting this together, and we've really enjoyed coordinating with you. And I think we have a really good presentation set up for today. So as Lori mentioned, feel free to enter any questions in the chat. Marcia tried to let you know that she was going to be there watching the chat, but we can't for some reason enter anything in. So just make sure, know that we're here, and we'll be monitoring that as well. So today's presentation is really not intended to be a deep dive into any of these topics. We wanted to give you, kind of broad overviews of these three areas of benefits. So if as mentioned, you can ask kind of more detailed questions, but we also had our email address on the first slide, and we will also have it again. If you don't catch that on the last slide, you're more than welcome to reach out to us. We, in addition to serving our clients, really desire to be a resource to the community. So keep that in mind as we go through. All right, so Medicare as a whole, as you can see from this guy carrying the gigantic book, it can get really complicated. The reality is that, it's nice that there are people who are specialists out here like Marcia and to a certain extent myself that can get through the detailed issues that might catch someone or trip them up as they kind of try to get the benefits lined up to the best of their ability. So we're just briefly going to touch on the four parts of Medicare, and most the part A is really where we want to start here, obviously, because it's A, so that makes sense. But this is hospital coverage, and folks, we'll get into some of the definitions that really kind of drive this in a couple slides here. But on the overview here. So if you apply for Medicare, you're automatically enrolled in Part A.
Okay, I'm going to interject though. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So you do have to qualify you have to have worked, either you or your spouse have to have paid in to the Medicare Social Security system through work credits in order to qualify. So it feels like it's everybody, but I have actually occasionally had some clients a woman who had never married and never worked and was sort of a trust fund baby, and she did not qualify for Medicare. She had to pay in even for Part A. That is not most of us, but anyone who's worked and paid Social Security taxes, or they're married to someone who did, then that's true. Everyone who applies is automatically enrolled in Part A.
Perfect. And just for your information, as I present, I'm really just going to touch on the overview points. And if Marcia has anything to add, as she just did, she I promise you, she will jump in.
Right, whether he wants me to or not. Anyway.
No, we welcome it. So what it covers hospital stays, hospice care, some skilled nursing care as well. And most people don't have to pay a premium, but there's a deductible, and we'll talk about that here momentarily. Okay, so it only covers a hospital stay if you have been admitted. So the really important point here. We'll talk about what that means again in just a moment here, but for each benefit period, what's important here is that there's a deductible. Every single time that you're tapping into this, that there's for 2021, $1,484 deductible. And the stage, you can see that the numbers here that we have, that there's zero copay for the first 60 days. The 30 days thereafter is $371 a day, and then that's $742 after that, so per day. So it can get expensive. The idea is hopefully that if you are admitted, that you are going to be so on a short time period, and the deductible then is actually money well spent, because from there out you have no copay.
Oh, wait, I have a question.
Oh,
I'm listening. I'm paying attention. How long is the benefit period? Is that a year?
you have a slide on that, or should I just answer it?
Yeah, I do have a slide on it.
Okay, let me answer it. We might, so a benefit period is, so if you go to the hospital today, and then you go out of and then you go from the hospital either to skilled nursing or you go home, and then when you're done, so you get treated for your condition, and then you have 60 days, 90 days, 60 days of not needing any care, then a new benefit period starts. So it's not once a year or twice a year. It really is So even if you're in the hospital just for 3 or 4 days, but then you'd need to go, to have a whole new benefit period would have to be that what I call 60 days clear.
Or if 2 weeks after that, you have to go back in again, you're still within that same period. So you don't have to pay another deductible.
Right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what does this include? Most of what you would think it does: room and board. Semi-private room is important. There's additional costs if you want a private room. Now, if it's necessary, we'll talk about this in a moment, but due to COVID concerns or whatnot, there are exceptions to that. Use of the hospital facilities, your medications, appliances, diagnostic, and physician service. The physician services are generally covered by Part B. So can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Well, let me go back to the room, the semi-private room. For anyone who's ever been to like what I still call Scottsdale Shea, but it has some different name now. That hospital and maybe many others, it's set up so they're all private rooms. So Medicare would cover that. I joke that they wouldn't like make you bring a cot in there. But if it's the kind of room that has 2 beds, it would just pay for that. The physician services, we hear a lot on the news, for example, about the hidden charges. The hospitals, boy, most doctors, they're hospitalists who are employed by the doctors, those would be covered. But if a doctor, like an anesthesiologist, usually works for a group of anesthesiologists, he's not an employee of the hospital, but he comes in and administers your anesthesia for your surgery. That would be paid for by Part B, which we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And as it relates to physician services, that's actually, if you will, better, because you're not going to get hit with that charge as part of the deductible. The Part B deductible is separate and it's a lot less. So it's just that it's a different service provider, so it's paid for by Part B.
Perfect. Thank you. What it does not cover: a private room, just discussed, private duty nursing, or it's just the deal breaker, the TV or phone in your room, which is all on your cell phone these days, so not too big of an issue there. Okay, so here's some considerations that have been put in place because of the pandemic that we're going through right now. Medicare will continue to cover, and I am just reading this verbatim, the cost of hospitalization for patients who've been discharged, but were just diagnosed with COVID and need to stay longer. So if if COVID is the reason that you're there, they're not going to say, oh, it's just COVID, you know, so you're past the deductibility period or whatnot.
And then the opposite also is COVID, not the reason you were there. Let's say you were there for surgery, but you caught COVID in the hospital, which sadly we hear a lot of. They're not going to say, well, if it had just been the surgery, you would be out after 3 days, so get out of here. No, if you need to stay because you contracted COVID, then you can stay.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah. So, and again, there's no additional charges for private room if medically necessary. It makes sense. And there's more flexibility for Part A to cover therapy and other services outside of the hospital. Okay, so, and Marcia just went over this. This is the benefit period. This is 60 days. Starts when you're admitted, and we remember the definition of that. And that's the period we're looking at. It's a 60-day period. Now, is that 60 days after you've been released?
It's 60 days after you've been released from care for the same thing.
Okay.
So if someone falls and breaks a hip and they go to the hospital for 3 days, and then they go from the hospital to a skilled rehab for 2 weeks, and then they go home from the skilled rehab and Medicare pays for physical therapy at home for another month, it's the end of that the services related to what started it in the first place, the broken hip, you know, after that's what ends that benefit period.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, that worked.
Hey, it did work. So what it means to be admitted, and this is an important piece of this. It's not just that you're in the hospital and they put you in a bed and you see someone, you know, a nurse stops by and they hook you up to an IV. It's a 2-night rule. What's it called? There's a
It's
term.
the 2 overnights, but I can't think.
Yeah, there's a term, but it needs to be 2 overnight stays that are required. You need to be required to stay there for 2 nights. That's when this benefit kicks in and you are admitted. If you don't stay 2 nights, or if you don't meet this qualification, then the stay is going to be covered on Part B, and there's a copay, which is usually about 20%. It's kind of, frankly, it's good if you are out with, you know, before this period starts. But thankfully there is coverage under Part B as well if you don't qualify under Part A.
And actually it's not for your room and board though. Part B doesn't cover sleeping in a hospital room. So you could be there, you're there, but you weren't quote admitted, and Part B doesn't cover that at all. And you would be hit with, so this is a big sort of the hidden charge thing. So I think it might be the next slide. I'm going to make sure I'm going to go back and finish that. So now there is a rule that they must tell you in writing if you have not been admitted, so that the charges are not a surprise, but more importantly, so that you can address that, so that you can work with the medical staff to say, you know, I've been here for 3 days because you're trying to figure out what's wrong with me. I have these symptoms, which are associated with this kind of disease, whatever it might be, and I needed to have been admitted, and to sort of get yourself admitted, which is not the same as getting in there. Now, you know how sometimes when you're going to have surgery and your doctor pre-admits you, they do paperwork to pre-admit you. What that really means is, besides the saving you paperwork when you get there, which is worth it, but what it also means is you have been admitted, and they're not going to wait until after the 2 days to decide if you really have. They've concluded that you're going to the hospital for a treatment or a condition that warrants being admitted, and so this, you wouldn't have to worry about this then.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so on the Medicare Part B, doctor and outpatient services, there are some health services that qualify under Part B. We're not going to go into that right now, but the thing to hit, sorry, I'm reading this because I set it up kind of funny. The thing to kind of make sure that you're aware of right now, and if you wait to enroll, there may be a penalty, but it might not be time for you to enroll in Part B. When you are actually, you know, when you're first getting your Medicare set up. So, and beyond that, there is a premium. So just, you know, financially, it might not make a lot of sense, but the premium is, thankfully, it's pretty low. It's the standard premium is $148.50 a month, but it's income based. So is there a way, can you get, what happens if you're beyond that income? It phase out?
Oh, it doesn't phase out. It's a lot higher premium. So,
okay.
So I am I'm 65 and my husband is a few years older than I. And believe me, I was thrilled to turn 65 and get on Medicare. And my premium is more than that because I am working and they look at the joint, but the coverage of Medicare is much better than many group programs. So then you are always eligible, but your premium would be higher. When Tobias was talking about someone who might not enroll in Part B right off the bat, often some employers will continue, somebody turns 65, they can still be on the company's plan. Our company doesn't allow that, but some do. So they're on Part A sort of automatically, but they say, well, why would I sign up for Part B? Because I'm not going to use it because I'm going to use my company's. That's where that situation often would come into play.
Very good.
Yeah.
And the deductible for Part B is $203, and it's not set on any of the periods like we were talking about earlier. So that's once a year, which is pretty low.
Yeah. And then I don't know if do we talk about, and supplemental insurance, so the copays and even the Part A copays, and I'll probably cover this later. So many people will buy a Medicare supplement. And you have a United Health or Blue Cross. It's a separate insurance policy that you pay for. And what that does is cover those deductibles and copays. And so it's sort of a decision that you would make. Would I rather have predictable $200 a month for my insurance and know all the stuff is going to be covered? Or if I'm pretty healthy, maybe I'll just kind of wait and see what happens. But when we mention supplemental insurance, sometimes that's called Medigap. Is what that is.
And we don't have a slide, so thank you.
Okay, good, thank you.
And Medicare Advantage plans, this can be very, very good for some people, but it can also be not so good. And this is kind of a fair warning up front. If anyone is interested in Medicare Advantage, pay very, very close attention to what the benefits are. So someone might want to take advantage of an Advantage plan because it includes dental or vision. But we have seen where that vision is in another state. And you really have to be careful because these policies are written in a way that there's people out there who make money off this, so they might not be looking after, all the dotted I's and crossed T's, if you will. So, but with that said, they're private insured. You must pay the Part B premium, but there's no additional premium on top of that. Most must provide all services required by A, B, and D, which we'll get to in a second. And this depends if they're so all over the place, but additional wellness services are often included.
So if folks, anybody was in Silver Sneakers back in the day when we could go to the gym. So Silver Sneakers was a wellness program that was covered by many people's Medicare Advantage plans. So it would pay the membership in a gym because they want, if people exercise regularly, then they're less likely to need other services. So that kind of stuff is really good. And also for younger seniors who don't have a lot of other health issues, it's like, well, why should I pay another premium? There's nothing wrong with me. So it does work out for younger, healthier people. It can work out quite well. But then all of those then the deductibles and copays are out of pocket. So again, it's that same sort of gamble, if you will. And also the other thing is if you have assets that you can, if you will, self-insure, it can continue to be good.
Okay, so under Part D and prescription drugs, we're not going to get into any of the donut hole or that conversation.
The donut hole is gone.
Is it really? Well, hey, congrats. Yay, celebration then today. I just had someone complaining about this. So I assumed it was still, they don't know that. I'll have to let them know. Okay. So of course it includes medications and copays, but they vary. Additional premiums for those with higher incomes. So there is an income-based component here. Thankfully, Congress has stepped in again, and there's some changes for CARES due to coronavirus. Plans must cover 90 days supplies of covered drug if requested. Out-of-network pharmacies must charge in-network prices if enrollees can't reasonably go to an in-network pharmacy. There are restrictions on mail and home delivery. The regular restrictions on mail and home deliveries are relaxed, and emergency refills are authorized when prescribers are not available to refill. Okay, so do you have anything else to add?
Oh, let me look at that and see. No, I don't think so. The other thing, well, only as it relates to the CARES Act, and another thing is for those of us who have been having telemedicine appointments now because of COVID, previously, pre-COVID, those were not necessarily covered by Medicare. And it was sort of a convenience, but you wouldn't, Medicare would not pay the doctor for that telemedicine visit. And they changed that with COVID because obviously of the public health. And the consensus is that will continue, that many, many people have discovered that how much more convenient those telemed appointments are. And even for the doctors, they don't have to rush from room to room to room with, and so as an example, I had a sinus infection recently. It's a sinus infection I have every year and a half or 2 years. I really was able to have a little telemed appointment. The doctor called in the prescription I've always had for that. And we agreed, you know what, if that didn't work, it's not anything that's going to harm me. If that didn't work, then I should come in for a live appointment. But how much more efficient that is. And Medicare is going to continue to pay for that telemed. So that is one thing I did want to touch on before we switch to VA.
Okay, very good. Moving on to VA, and for all you veterans out there, thank you for your service, without question. We're really going to focus on aid and attendance here today because it's the most common benefit, pension that is provided through our VA insurance. And so what it is it provides monthly payments that are added on top of your pension for qualified veterans and survivors. So survivors also, would be a veteran's spouse if the veteran had passed away. Very important that the spouse is going to be taken care of in recognition of service here. So benefits can be used to pay for medical and non-medical expenses that are part of long-term care. If someone is adamant that they wanted to stay at their house, for instance, that this could be very helpful because that can become extraordinarily expensive. And there's some great benefits that are offered through aid and attendance here.
And another benefit for speaking to the folks at the summit is, not every facility takes ALTCS or Medicaid, but the VA benefit is a cash benefit. So obviously there's no facility that doesn't take that. It's cash that's deposited in your bank account to use where you think is best.
That's great. And as you'll see in a moment, there are income limitations here and qualifications.
Yeah.
So who qualifies? The statement here is that veterans who served on active duty for at least 90 consecutive days, including at least one full day during a time of war, may be eligible for aid and attendance if they qualify for the basic veteran pension #1 and meet the clinical and financial requirements. So first, what is a time of war?
We don't have to read them, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to read all these, but they are sparsed out. And I think what's most interesting right now is that the Gulf War is still going on, because there's not been a proclamation that the war has ended. So essentially, we don't know how long that time period is going to be.
And I just, I see very few World War II vets anymore, unfortunately. We've lost so many of them. I do have many folks who come in during that in-between period, in between the World War II and Korea, or in between the Korean conflict and Vietnam. In fact, at that time, there was still a draft. So people were drafted into the service, but it wasn't a period of war, and so they would not be eligible for aid and attendance. I don't think that's fair, but nobody in Congress is asking me my opinion so, about anything. No, sorry.
Okay, so you do need to be eligible for pension. And what are those eligibility criteria? You only need to qualify for one of these. 65 or older with no or limited income, permanent or total disability, receive supplemental security income, Social Security disability, or you reside in a nursing home. Okay, so the clinical requirements. If you meet the two foregoing requirements, you also must have one of these. You must be bedridden. You must have severe visual impairment as defined, as you can see on the slide here. Reside in a nursing home. That's pretty common with all these requirements. Require help with activities of daily living. This is important. If this is really, let's just say this might be the only access you're going to be able to get into VA. It's not like you have to, you have to need help with 3 of your ADLs. they're going to take a look at this kind of on a whole. And so it's the more ADLs that you need assistance with, frankly, the more likely you're going to be to qualify. But because it's the VA, there's no guarantee. And it's important to plan. It's important, in seeing somebody who specializes in this area, they're going to be able to tell you, you might not know that there's something you're doing or you have trouble with that is actually going to be helpful for your application. And the financial requirements. So you also.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
because I don't know if we defined activities of daily living. So the activities of daily living are eating, and and this comes up with ALTCS too, so we'll cover it here. And by eating, that means the food is put in front of you and you can get it to yourself, not fixing the meal or shopping for the meal. Bathing or showering, grooming, transporting. So transferring. So even if you use a wheelchair or a walker, that's not one of them, because you can ambulate. I'm putting that in quotes because if you're in a wheelchair, you're not ambulating. But can you transfer from the bed to the wheelchair, from the chair to the commode? If you can do that independently, or if you can't do that independently, then that's one of the activities of daily living. Or toileting. Can you manage that? And even if someone's incontinent, do they manage their incontinence supplies independently? Those are the activities of daily living. So often a family will come in and I'll ask, and they say, well, she can't manage her medications. That's not one of them. There's a separate list called instrumental activities of daily living, sort of the next step to really be independent. And that's driving, shopping, managing your medications, managing your finances. And actually for VA aid and attendance, you get points, for lack of a better way to put it. They will recognize that someone who can't manage those things does need aid and attendance and may be eligible for the benefits. So like Tobias said, it's not black and white, but in some cases that actually works to your benefit.
Thank you.
Marcia and Tobias, I have a question. When the word nursing home is used in there, because the summit is an assisted living and memory care community, we do not call ourselves a nursing home. Is there a definition to that we should know what that means when you have it on according to the VA?
That is such an excellent question. And by nursing home, they mean what we think they mean, a skilled nursing center. An assisted living or memory care is not considered a nursing home. And again, many people at the summit can qualify for benefits. The difference is in a nursing home, it's like in a nursing home, check the box, we know they qualify. This, we need to demonstrate that what are the things that person needs help with, and is the summit helping them with those things? And so we definitely can still get there, but thank you for asking that.
And is that a doctor that's confirming the need for that care, whatever it might be?
Yes, there's a form when someone wants to apply for VA benefits that the person's doctor has to complete. And I sometimes joke, it's pretty obvious what the answers to, it's check boxes, literally. And there's room for more explanation, but it's check boxes, whether the person can or cannot. And it's pretty clear what you want your doctor to be saying in order to qualify for benefits. But it does have to be completed by a doctor, an MD or a DO. They won't accept it if it's completed by a nurse, which I think is old fashioned, but good to know.
Thank you.
Okay, so the limitation here is net worth, and it's my understanding, and you can confirm, that even if you're above this net worth to a certain extent, it doesn't mean that you're going to be excluded completely from this benefit. Isn't that correct?
Well, it depends. So in other words, let's look at this person with 130, and it doesn't include your primary residence. So many of us, our home is our largest asset. So this is someone who would have if you have a house and $50,000 in the bank and it all totals up to $750,000, you would qualify. But it's pretty black and white as it relates to the assets that are included.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, and this is another area where it's important to plan. There are ways that we can reduce what your net worth is, but you have to be cautious. When we say there's a 3-year look back period, the idea is that you can't just start throwing property around left and right to your family members, and you're still actually using it, but you just say that it's titled in their name. the VA is going to say, no, that doesn't work. So, but there are exceptions, and we'll talk about that on this next slide.
Right, and that there used to not be a look back for VA, and you could, I would say, you can transfer an asset in 1 month and you can apply the next month. And they tightened that up recently. And at first we were all very like, this is not fair. This is not their primary motivation. Well, I'm sure it had a little bit to do with saving money for the government, but also many of us have experienced those, frankly, very unscrupulous VA qualifying annuity salespeople who would, in my opinion, prey on people in care facilities. And they really wanted to put a stop to that. So they would take some person who had, let's say, $50,000. They qualified anyway and require that they buy this kind of annuity, which they didn't need to qualify. And so the VA thought one of the best ways to nip that in the bud would be to require to put in the transfer penalty.
Very good. And we actually took some stuff out here.
Yeah. Oh, did I take out stuff I shouldn't have?
No, it's okay. There are exceptions to what is part of your net worth.
Yes. So, oh, you're right. I did. So the primary residence, as I said, is not counted. And also up to now, interestingly, if it is, as long as it's on a piece of property that is not bigger than 2.5 acres. So even in Paradise Valley, you're fine. Those are all an acre and a quarter. That is an issue for people who own farm property. And that's quite the controversial subject in other states where that's much more prevalent. But that whole is not counted, and your vehicle is not counted, your personal property, even if you have expensive artwork and jewelry, none of that is counted. And there are certain annuities also that are not counted, but that was where I said, oh, that little complicated for this kind of presentation because it's so personal. So, but definitely there are assets or quote unquote transfers that can be done to help a particular person qualify that we would talk about in, in a more private setting.
Thank you. And there are other forms of VA benefits. We just don't have time to go over everything here right now. And if you want to elaborate on any of this,
and the first and the third last are really the same. I don't know why I did that, but there's certainly the disability compensation for service-connected injuries or illnesses. And that is no financial eligibility. They suffered this illness or injury, and therefore they're entitled to compensation. And so for people in the, you think of the classic, maybe someone who lost a limb, someone who is paralyzed, but also for the Vietnam era veterans who are now aging, who were in Vietnam, several diseases that cause ongoing the need for chronic care, in particular Parkinson's disease, is determined to have been caused by exposure to Agent Orange, and therefore that veteran is eligible for long-term disability. And it's also what's called a presumptive. So all you have to show to apply is, I was in Vietnam, here's my DD2, my discharge paper, here's my neurologist who says I have Parkinson's disease, and you're automatically eligible for that. So I always like to ask about that, almost like no matter what if I meet someone in my practice who has Parkinson's disease, I always ask if they're a veteran. And also veterans from Korea also were exposed. They were experimenting with Agent Orange there. Nice to know. The housebound pension, Tobias, that's a similar pension to aid and attendance. It just has a little bit different medical criteria. Is that right? Yeah. And then, of course, VA healthcare for veterans, not their spouses or surviving spouses, but veterans who there's nothing wrong with them, but they need healthcare, can register for healthcare through the VA. There's various copays depending on if you're service-connected injury or illness, there's no cost. I often remind veterans of that, especially as it relates to prescriptions. It is very inexpensive prescription drug coverage. So if you can sort of, again, in a non-COVID time, if you can sort of force yourself to go to the VA hospital, make an appointment, wait 3 months to have that appointment, still it's worth it for a very modest copay of those prescription meds, much better than the Medicare plan. Okay, so now we're going to switch to aid and attend. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's you. That's still you.
This is just kind of the extension. This is, so what do I qualify for if she's rearing and ready to talk about access. So this is our maximum benefits amount again, we're happy to, I've given the slide to Lori. So if you want to take a closer look at these numbers, she will forward this on to you, but they're in front of you. So I'm just not going to go over. What's nice about this is it does talk about, okay, so here's basic pension, here's disabled and housebound, and then regular aid and attendance. Okay.
And so I'm going to just mention this before we get to ALTCS. This is a little bit more flexible to qualify for. And like we said, the benefit is a cash benefit, which is great, but it does max out. And so you want to be aware of that, depending if you have very, very expensive care needs, that's when maybe ALTCS might be a better option. And now we're going to get to ALTCS.
Mhm.
So, and Tobias put this slide in. So ALTCS is an Arizona state benefit, whereas VA is federal. This is state. So the main office is here in Maricopa in Phoenix. But you know, when the people that I work with, I have no idea how they assign their work. I mean, I'll be talking to someone in Yuma, I'll be talking to someone in wherever, and the result theoretically is the same. But that's just like a little bit of an overview slide. So ALTCS is for access, which is Medicaid in Arizona. It is the like health insurance. And then a program of access is the ALTCS, Arizona Long-Term Care System is what that acronym stands for, that provides assistance with long-term, what we call custodial care. So the person must be a US citizen or legal resident, someone with a green card does qualify, residing in Arizona. The residing in Arizona, I just went through this week. So we have so many folks here who move from somewhere else, and we have many clients who come in and say, my mom is still in Illinois, she's going to be moving here, I know she's going to need to be on ALTCS when she gets here. We can certainly plan, but we cannot start the application until she is physically here. And then, because I just went through that this week, even though mom did come and she's living in a care community, so that's where she lives, they need to either change her address with Social Security, or she needs to go get an Arizona state ID. They are going to require that to confirm that the person really resides here. But it doesn't have to have been for any particular duration. It could be the day, you know, you can get here, you can go to DMV and get your ID, and then you could apply. The medical requirement, over 65 and or disabled. So somebody who has a disability and got SSI when they were younger, due to a medical and not behavioral condition. If someone, because of schizophrenia, is just unable to take care of him or herself, unfortunately, that person is not eligible for ALTCS. The stated theory, there's a constitutional challenge there somewhere that someone's going to take up. But the theory is that there are other resources to provide similar care for people of the mental health system. And so ALTCS doesn't have to provide that care. And that person, due to reduced cognitive function, are unable to perform at least 2 ADLs. So we talked about what the ADLs are now and before, and they recognize, okay, someone who had a stroke, maybe that person physically is unable to get in the shower. But they also recognize that someone with advanced dementia may be able to physically walk and stand in the shower, but needs constant prompting to be honest, know what to do when they get there, you know, and to be assisted in there, to make sure that they wash and to make sure that, so ALTCS does recognize that that person cannot perform them independently. And then also, I'm not going to spend much time on it, but younger people also, people who are disabled before the age of 19. So someone with Down syndrome or autism, those sorts of conditions that someone has as a young person. And then if approved, whereas the VA pays a cash amount, ALTCS requires the person to pay a share of cost, and then ALTCS makes up the difference. So that's why when I said before, if someone needs very expensive care, this might be a better option for them. So the financial eligibility requirements, Tobias's slides were much neater. So the maximum allowable income that person can make, there's the amount of income that the person can make each month. The spouse's income is not counted. So we're going to talk later about how you qualify for your resources. When someone is married, then they look at both spouses' assets. But for income, they look at the name of the check. So if you think of sort of the classic couple of the 50s, where the husband worked and the wife stayed at home and worked in the home. So the husband gets a large amount of Social Security and maybe a pension, and the wife gets half of the husband's Social Security. That's the only income she gets in her name. Then that's all that they would look at, and they would say she would qualify even if the husband has $5,000 a month income, let's just say. The money from the sale of a resource is not considered income. It's what we think of as income, your regular monthly income. Now, distributions from a trust or income received by trust might be counted. Many people, I cannot tell you how many people call me and say, somebody said I need a Miller trust. And about 75% of the time, they don't. I mean, that's a term that a Miller trust is a vehicle where, let's go back to this person. Let's say that person's income was $2,500 a month. A Miller trust is a vehicle where a portion of that person's income can be sort of set aside so that it's not counted, so that the person can then qualify. Although that income in the Miller trust still needs to be used for their care. And we would be like totally in the weeds if we went through that more. Yeah. Right. And then we're bouncing around a little bit, but once the person does qualify, and they say, well, what about that share of cost? They will allow the married spouse to keep a portion of the income to have enough to run the household, basically. Let's use that couple, I use an example, let's use that in reverse. The wife has $700 a month income and her husband has $2,200. They will not make them use that whole $2,200 for share of cost. They'll make sure that the wife has at least that much so that she can run the household and not also impoverish herself. What are the resources that are not counted? Because it's cash type stuff that is counted. The primary residence, personal and household good, one vehicle used by or for the benefit of the applicant. So even a very expensive handicap van, that's not going to be counted. They understand why you need that, and they're not going to sort of charge that against you. Some income producing property, certain assets. So when it comes time to apply, it's definitely worth making sure not only that you're not penalized for these assets that aren't counted, but also maybe that's a way to quote unquote spend down to purchase some of those kinds of things. So that's kind of ties back into the maximum resource limits. For a customer, for the person themselves, they refer to the person as the customer. The person getting ALTCS can have $2,000 a month. The community spouse, that's the spouse of the customer who does not need care, him or herself. So that person stays in the home while the other spouse maybe goes to a care facility. That person can retain a significant amount of assets. Again, they have figured out that it doesn't help even the public agency. It doesn't do them any good to make both people be impoverished and looking to the system. Let's allow the spouse to continue to function. So that kind of touches on, and that's where the planning opportunities really come into play when someone needs to consider ALTCS. And by the way, and I know that the summit may not be contracted with ALTCS, but just even for planning for the future, when you don't know what might happen, or if there's a spouse, just to make sure that you don't do something where you inadvertently preclude someone's eligibility for ALTCS, again, by accident, as opposed to understanding the criteria and saying, you know what, I don't need to worry about that. In order to do that assessment, to figure out what that other spouse can retain, that's a process. It's called the Community Spouse Resource Assessment, where basically the couple tells ALTCS, these are the assets that we have, both of us. Some owned by husband, some owned by wife, some owned jointly. They look at that and they come back and say, okay, this is how much has to be spent down before you then come back again and qualify financially for ALTCS. Someone just asked me the other day, is there a time period in between? No, it doesn't matter how long it takes you. So sometimes it's worth doing the Community Spouse Resource Assessment, even if you don't think if you will ever need to get there, because we don't know what's going to happen. So at least have that box checked that you have that assessment. Now, I say that the spouse, the person who may need care, does need to meet the medical criteria. Tobias and his wife, who are young people, perfectly healthy, can't say, let's just do a Community Spouse Resource Assessment and see what, somebody, they have to sort of at least medically need the care, even if they don't financially qualify yet. The transfer of resources, and this actually also applies to the transfers back in the VA. So you hear about, VA was 3 years, ALTCS is a 5-year look back. So generally speaking, transferring funds to achieve eligibility, either to another person or to an irrevocable trust without getting paid in return, triggers a penalty period. So that's the key, getting compensation in exchange. So as a good example, my same group, people who moved here from Illinois, they sold their house in Illinois, and then they came here and they moved in with their kids. The kids had a casita. And so they like fixed up the casita so it was appropriate for mom and dad. So they gave money to the kids to do that, but they got something in exchange. They got their place to live. So we determined a value for what was done, and that was not a transfer, that was purchasing something. Some exceptions, you can transfer to the spouse. That's how we get stuff out of the name of the spouse who needs care to the other. Transfer to a disabled child. And it is a child, it's not a grandchild, it can be a stepchild, but it's sort of a child in your household is basically what that means. Purchase of certain types of qualifying annuities, and also creation of a special needs trust for someone who is under 65. So someone who is under 65 and has an accident, that's why they need ALTCS, and they get a big settlement, they can put that money in a special needs trust, and then they can still qualify for ALTCS. I want to also touch on estate recovery, something that I have heard people say, if I go on ALTCS, then ALTCS can take my house. So first of all, the ALTCS can never take your house. They might get the money when you sell the house, but really there is a difference. So federal law requires access to file a claim against the customer's estate to recover the costs it incurred to provide benefits after someone was 55. So a young person, it doesn't apply to them. So it applies to property owned by the customer at the time of death, and it's subject to an affidavit of small estate transfer or probate. I mention that because, so if someone, first of all, remember, a person doesn't have many assets to have ALTCS. That's how they got on ALTCS. The one thing they might have is that house. And so what ALTCS says is, okay, if you have a house after you die, we're going to pursue to see if we can get repaid when you sell it. So if it transfers from the customer to the spouse, they're not going to go after it. When the spouse ultimately sells it, they may or may not pursue. They may or may not pursue it. But a way to avoid that is, in Arizona, we have something called a beneficiary deed. It's like, on your bank account, you can have a pay on death. When I die, the money goes to my son. You can do that with a certain kind of deed in Arizona also. That is a non-probate transfer. So if the person is thinking they're going to need ALTCS and they prepare a beneficiary deed to say, when I die, I want my home to go to my children, that is a non-probate transfer, and so that there's no estate recovery. That's just a little aside as a planning technique. Now there's a difference, which is a lien, and that is when someone goes into a nursing home. Lori asked that good question before, what's a nursing home? Truly, a nursing home is skilled nursing, and they get care there for many years. Then ALTCS can record a lien against the property. Again, they can't make you sell it. You can have your spouse or your children, people can live in there for many years, but at whatever time you intend to sell it, it's just like a mechanic's lien. If somebody didn't pay the plumber to do their work, that lien has to be satisfied at the time the house is sold. And then the rest of the proceeds would go to whoever you want them to go to. So we almost met your time frame that you asked us to do, Lori, to ask for 15 minutes at the end. And when you get this is our team, Tobias and myself, and we have 2 elder care coordinators. We really benefit from their different skill sets. One's a nurse, one's a social worker. Deborah Dennis is I took her from the VA benefits office. I snatched her away. She is our VA benefits specialist. And then Bernie Roethlisberg is one of our paralegals, and she is just a whiz at ALTCS. We joke that the people at ALTCS are afraid of her, which is exactly the way it should be.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll throw that up.
Yeah.
Lori, we'll turn it back to you.
That was fantastic. As you can see, I was trying to learn as much as I possibly can, because when I listen to all that, I just hear this mumble jumble. Like, these parts and pieces that you need to do in the right order. And you know, I failed to introduce myself when we first started the presentation. So my name is Lori Marsh, and I am the marketing director over at the Summit at Sunland Springs. We are an assisted living and memory care community, and we just opened our outpatient memory clinic. That means if somebody is suffering from some cognitive decline and they actually want to make an effort to do something to help themselves, this is what we can do while keeping you independent in your home with your loved ones. You come into our community clinic and have some therapy treatments. Failed to mention that in the beginning because I was just so excited to get started with you too. The information that we wanted to bring to you on the benefits that are available through Arizona and federal benefits are underutilized, and we can't say that enough, to want to make sure that we can put you in front of resources to be able to help you plan. One thing that I have found with the residents that come and live with us, or the people that I've interacted with, is that they are missing out on money, and they feel like they've planned for their retirement, but then they get to this point and going, oh, I really do need some care. And how are we going to pay for that? And just to put numbers out there, if you are living at the Summit, you could expect to spend, you know, $4,000 to $5,000 a month, and that's private pay. We do not accept ALTCS unless it's in our memory care community and you've already been with us private pay for 24 months. So if you kind of just let that sit in there, right now, if you do some planning, you can have some options. If you don't plan, you don't have choices. You don't have options. They're very limited. So let's go ahead. I have a hand raised. Let me see if I can figure out how to answer this. Here, I think there's a question. I don't know how to get that hand answered. Oh, Don, here we go. Don.
Oh, there he is.
Don, I see your hand is raised. Yes, ask your question.
Well, I have a little bit of a unique situation in the fact that my partner and I are not married. We have been together for 20 years, and but she has been diagnosed with MCI, mild cognitive impairment, and will probably sooner or later in the not too distant future be required to be in some kind of care. And how does that affect us as individuals rather than as a married couple?
So you would be, I mean, you just would be treated as individuals, so she would, it has its pluses and minuses. I was just talking to Tobias about a client about this before. So for example, I mean, she would have to spend down all the way to that $2,000.
Now, one other question.
Sure.
She has a IRA. Does she have to cash that out?
Well, it depends. And that's every lawyer's favorite answer to a question, is it depends. But if it is like fully annuitized, and so we'd have to look at what that is. So she can't quote cash it in. It generates through the RMD a specific amount every month. She would not have to cash it in, but that every monthly payments would be counted as income. But I wanted to, before sort of we get to that, the positive is, and I don't know what your living situation is, and of course we want to make this more general for anyone's benefit. A person can pay another person as a caregiver, and that's not a transfer. You're paying for services. Now, you're not allowed to pay your spouse. They recognize it, but perhaps she could, quote, pay you for services that you could get into a little agreement between you, the services that you're providing to help her, and she could pay you, and you're going to take that money, you're going to set it aside. But she can do that because you're not married, versus if you were married, she couldn't. So there are planning techniques that can be done, and for a couple who is unmarried, but generally she will be evaluated as a single applicant. Arizona does not recognize the concept of common law marriage. So unless you're legally married, then you're not, basically.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Great question, Dawn. Thank you. We have another minute. If anybody else has any other questions, please feel free to raise your hand, type them in the chat box. But in the meantime, I am going to ask my question and then let everybody else know that we do have another presentation with Marcia and Tobias on.
It's the 9th of February.
It is the 9th of February. I'm on that. I promise you I'm on that. I got it. Do you know what time it is? Here we go.
2 o'clock.
Same.
2 o'clock. Perfect. We're very fortunate at the summit that we have a number of different presentations that are happening, everything on brain health to we have a author that's going to be doing a presentation on Alzheimer's and the journey, as well as some elder law. So the upcoming presentation, February 9th, is on wills, trusts, and all the legal documents that every senior should have. And so I have a question for you, Tobias.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that we are seeing that's unfortunately happening with the case of COVID is some people, if they're having to go in, they catch COVID and it progresses and they're going to have to go into the hospital. Sometimes that is the last time that you're seeing them, as you're not able to go in and continue that visitation. And unfortunately, if something happens, that their medical care continue.
Ooh, you froze for a second, Lori.
That anybody, not choices for themselves or having to go to the hospital.
So Lori, you froze for great when you're asking the crux of your question. So the person goes in and then what were you, let's see if we can, I'm going to stop the screen share. Maybe that will,
Okay.
yeah, open up
The
some more.
question is, what is the medical document that every person, not just seniors, should have before they're heading into a hospital situation?
Yeah, it's a great question and something we see all the time. Folks, you really need to have powers of attorney. You really need to have a medical power of attorney is super important. So is a financial power of attorney. They're two separate documents. And if your spouse is unable to make decisions for you, we're going to have to institute a court procedure. You may have heard guardianships and conservatorships. It's long. It can take a while. If you need emergency care, it could be a month before we get an order from the court giving anybody authority to speak on your behalf. So if you don't have your powers of attorney, they're basic documents. I strongly urge you to look into having those put together, especially now with COVID. And then, the other two, just real quick, a will is very easy to do, as well as a living will. And those are what we would consider our basic estate planning documents. But right now, powers of attorney are critical.
And then I want to, and I know, I'm sure Tobias is going to say this in the next presentation, the healthcare power of attorney, which is the situation that you described, Lori, those are available on the Arizona Attorney General's website. They can be downloaded. There's no cost. The healthcare power of attorney does not need to be notarized as long as it is witnessed by an independent witness. So in that type of emergency situation, as long as the person is cognitively able to understand and to sign it, is a way to, now the ones that you might get from an attorney can be more customized, but in that emergency situation, at least you can have something.
That is fantastic. And for all those that have participated on this call, you will actually receive a PDF of those documents that I've gotten from the state. So you have them, you can print them out. If you need help printing them out, please let me know. I'm happy to print them at the community and you can pick them up. We'd rather have you be prepared than feel like you were stuck. With that, I will go ahead and say thank you so much, Marcia and Tobias, for this presentation today. I appreciate your time and your insight. And if anybody would like to reach out to Marcia or Tobias and you didn't grab their contact information, I will go ahead and include that in the presentation materials that are sent out. But I certainly do appreciate everybody. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.
It was our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.